Sometimes a story doesn't begin with a mystery. It begins with a place, a conversation, or a quiet morning that feels completely ordinary. And then something changes. This is Between the Pages.
Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Between the Pages, a Bradford Press podcast. We are so glad you chose to join us. Today, we ask the question, why stories matter? And along the way, I will tell you why I chose to start Bradford Press. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to Between the Pages, a Bradford Press podcast. I'm Brad, and I'm really glad you're here. This podcast exists for a simple reason. Stories have always mattered to people. Long before movies or television, long before phones or constant notifications, people gathered around fires, kitchen tables, and front porches to listen. Not because they had nothing else to do, but because stories helped them make sense of the world around them. Stories help them pass along wisdom, remember people who came before them, and understand experiences they had never personally lived. A story could carry a lesson, a warning, a hope, or even comfort after a difficult season. And in many ways, that hasn't changed. Today, many books are discovered through algorithms, advertisements, and short descriptions. Useful things, certainly. They help us find titles we might otherwise miss, but they also miss something important. A story isn't just information. A story is an experience. It's time spent somewhere else. It's companionship for a while. It's the feeling of stepping into another life and returning with a slightly different understanding than when you left. This podcast is my attempt to bring that experience back. I didn't start Bradford Press because I wanted to run a business. I started it because of what stories did for me. At different points in life, stories provided things I didn't always realize I needed. Comfort during uncertain seasons, perspective during confusing ones, courage when decisions felt heavy, and sometimes simply the reassurance that someone else had felt what I was feeling and had found a way through it. Certain characters stayed with me long after I finished the final chapter. Not because they were perfect heroes, but because they struggled. They made mistakes. They doubted themselves. They kept going anyway. And in a quiet way, they made the real world feel more understandable. I began to notice something over time. I didn't always remember every plot detail. I couldn't always recount every event in the story, but I remembered how the story felt. I remembered how it changed my thinking or how it met me exactly where I was at that moment in life. Eventually, I realized something important. Books don't just entertain us, they accompany us. They sit quietly beside us in difficult seasons. They celebrate with us in hopeful ones. They give words to thoughts we couldn't quite form ourselves. And sometimes, at just the right moment, they offer reassurance that uncertainty does not last forever. That realization is what led to Bradford Press. I wanted to publish stories that felt like companions. Stories people didn't simply read once and forget, but stories they carried with them. Stories they returned to. Stories that felt familiar in a comforting way. But publishing books alone wasn't enough. A product page can tell you what a book is about. It can list the characters, describe the setting, and hint at the plot. But it can't show you how the story feels. It can't recreate the atmosphere, the quiet moments, or the sense of stepping into another place for a while. So this podcast is different from a review show. I won't be summarizing plots or critiquing authors. Instead, each week I'll bring you inside the story, reading passages, introducing characters, and talking about the ideas and emotions behind them. Some weeks you'll hear cozy mysteries where justice quietly prevails and order is restored. Other weeks you'll hear suspenseful stories where characters face difficult choices and courage is tested. And sometimes we'll step into historical fiction, where the past becomes personal and we see familiar events through human eyes. The goal is simple. Before you ever decide whether to read a book, you get to experience it. Before we go any further, I want you to hear an example. Rather than describe what I mean, it's better to experience it. I'm going to read a short passage from a cozy mystery. As you listen, don't focus on the plot. Instead, notice how the world feels, the atmosphere, the details, and how quickly you begin to understand the place and the character living in it. Let's step inside the Tumblebrook Inn.
The Tumblebrook Inn sat gracefully at the edge of Tumblebrook's lake, its golden red reflection shimmering in the crisp autumn light. Inside, the mingling scents of cinnamon and apples wrapped the lobby in cozy warmth, punctuated by the gentle crackle of the hearth. Amelia Farnsworth hummed softly as she adjusted a vase of wildflowers on the front desk. Crimson mums and orange daisies glowed in the golden light streaming through the windows, brightening the room. "Perfect, Lady Grey," Amelia murmured, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Her companion, a regal British short-hair cat, perched atop the counter with the poise of a queen surveying her domain. Lady Grey twitched her whiskers, a gesture Amelia chose to interpret as approval. The inn had been a gift from her late Aunt Annie, a legacy Amelia cherished deeply. Its ivy-clad facade, wraparound porch, and inviting atmosphere made it the heart of Tumblebrook, a picturesque lakeside town in northern Minnesota. For Amelia, it was more than a business. It was a home steeped in stories, though some of its secrets remained untold. Outside, the October breeze carried the gentle rustle of fiery leaves, swirling into lazy piles near the porch steps. Amelia took a deep breath, savoring the tranquility. This was her favorite time of year, when the inn buzzed with visitors, yet her tasks remained predictable. Predictable until now. Lady Grey's ears perked as the crunch of tires over gravel broke the stillness. "Looks like our first guest is here," Amelia said, brushing her hands on her apron. Through the window, she watched a sleek, black sedan glide to a stop. The man who emerged adjusted a scarf around his neck, his movements deliberate and calculated. His tailored coat and polished leather shoes hinted at sophistication, or perhaps someone eager to project it. "Time to shine," Amelia whispered, straightening her apron as she moved toward the door. "Welcome to the Tumblebrook Inn, Mr. Hensley," Amelia greeted, her warm smile an invitation into the cozy space. Gregor Hensley, the renowned author known for his biting wit and taut mysteries, stepped inside. His sharp gaze swept across the lobby, taking in every detail. "Miss Farnsworth, I presume?" "That's right," she replied, clasping her hands in front of her. "We're thrilled to have you here. Your suite is ready and privacy is a priority," Gregor interrupted, his tone polite but curt. "I trust there will be no disturbances during my stay." Amelia's smile faltered briefly before she composed herself. "Of course, privacy is our specialty." Gregor nodded, unslinging a leather satchel from his shoulder as he approached the check-in desk. Lady Grey tilted her head, her amber eyes fixed on him. "Interesting cat," Gregor remarked, scribbling in the guest book. "She's part of the charm," Amelia replied lightly. "Lady Grey keeps an eye on everyone." Gregor's lips twitched into what might have been a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's hope her observations stay confined to the lobby." Amelia chuckled politely, though the comment left her uneasy. The sound of the front door creaking open drew her attention. Another guest entered, dragging a battered leather suitcase that seemed as weathered as its owner. "Ezra Grayson," the man announced with a dramatic flourish. In his 60s, with a glint of mischief in his sharp blue eyes, Ezra exuded theatrical energy. A deck of cards spun absently in his hands as he surveyed the room. "Welcome to the Tumblebrook Inn, Mr. Grayson," Amelia said. "Ezra, please," he replied with a wink. "Titles are for people trying to be taken seriously." "Fair enough." Amelia chuckled, finding herself charmed despite his dramatic entrance. "Lovely place," Ezra said, flicking a card into the air before catching it smoothly. "Perfect for a little magic." Before Amelia could respond, another figure hesitated in the doorway, a slight, nervous-looking woman clutching a book tightly to her chest. "Miss Marks," Amelia said warmly. "Welcome. Let me help with your bag." "No need," Daphne Marks mumbled, keeping her gaze on the floor. Her large glasses slipped down her nose as she nodded quickly and shuffled toward the staircase. Amelia exchanged a glance with Lady Grey, who flicked her tail in silent acknowledgement. Minutes later, the final arrival brought a gust of cold air and unmistakable eccentricity. Arlo Kane marched in, his jacket adorned with patches that read, "Truth is out there, and question everything." "Amelia Farnsworth?" he asked, his eyes darting around the room. "That's me," she replied. "Good. Let's keep this place secure. No listening devices, right?" Amelia blinked, unsure how to respond. "Right," Arlo said, answering his own question. He gave Lady Grey a long, appraising look before heading to his room without another word. "Quirky bunch this weekend, huh, lady?" Amelia murmured once the guests had dispersed. Lady Grey let out a soft meow, her tail twitching as if to say, "You've no idea." As twilight fell, Amelia made her evening rounds. The hallways were quiet, save for the occasional creak of floorboards and faint murmurs behind closed doors. Lady Grey trotted ahead, her tail held high like a banner of authority.
What I love about moments like this is that stories often begin quietly, not with explosions or dramatic revelations, but with ordinary places and ordinary people. And that's what makes them powerful, because most of life is lived in ordinary moments. Conversations at breakfast, familiar routines, small decisions that seem insignificant at the time. Stories help us notice those moments. They remind us that kindness matters, that attention matters, that small actions can have large consequences, even if we don't see them immediately. They also remind us that courage can be quiet. It doesn't always look dramatic or heroic. Sometimes courage looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like asking one more question. Sometimes it's simply choosing to care when it would be easier not to. And sometimes hope doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply appears patiently, one small choice at a time. Stories often reveal their intentions in their openings. Two books in the same genre can begin in similar settings and still create very different expectations. So I want to share one more passage. Another visit to the same town, another morning at the inn, but written to create a slightly different feeling. As you listen this time, notice not only the comfort of the setting, but the small changes in tone. Pay attention to what feels normal and what doesn't.
The early morning mist clung to the eaves of the Tumblebrook Inn as Amelia Farnsworth smoothed the front of her crisp linen apron. She had spent the past hour ensuring the parlor was flawless, bookshelves freshly dusted, a fire crackling in the hearth, and the warm scent of cinnamon scones drifting from the kitchen. Everything had to be perfect. Today was a special day. Tobias Greer, the esteemed travel writer, was set to arrive. Amelia had read his columns for years, marveling at how he captured the soul of tucked-away towns with words that danced. His praise was transformative. Places featured in his articles saw a surge of tourism, attention, and acclaim. Now Tumblebrook was under his discerning gaze. If his visit went well, the inn might be featured in his next piece. A soft trill interrupted her thoughts. Lady Grey, her sleek British short hair, sat poised near the bay window, her intelligent amber eyes fixed on the approaching figure outside. "You always know when someone's coming, don't you?" Amelia mused, scratching the cat gently behind the ears. Lady Grey flicked her tail but didn't break her gaze. A moment later, the heavy oak door swung inward with a reluctant sigh, and Tobias Greer stepped inside. "Mr. Greer, welcome to Tumblebrook Inn," Amelia greeted warmly, offering her most practiced and genuine smile. Tobias removed his hat, shaking a few stray raindrops from his thick graying hair. His sharp eyes swept the room, absorbing the cozy charm with the quiet discernment of a seasoned traveler. Dressed in a tailored overcoat and carrying a well-worn leather satchel, he exuded an air of quiet authority. "Thank you, Ms. Farnsworth," he said, offering a firm handshake. His voice was deep, cultured, carrying the weight of a man who had seen the world and written about it. "Please, call me Amelia." He gave a curt nod before glancing down. Lady Grey had slinked forward, weaving through his legs before stopping cold. Her ears flattened slightly and her whiskers twitched. Instead of her usual friendly purr, she merely observed him in eerie silence. Tobias arched a brow. "Your cat has an interesting way of greeting guests. She's usually quite the charmer, Amelia admitted, puzzled by Lady Grey's sudden hesitance. Perhaps she's just being shy. Tobias didn't seem convinced, but he moved on, adjusting his satchel. I trust my room is ready? Of course, right this way. As Amelia led him up the grand staircase, Lady Grey lingered behind, her tail flicking as she watched them disappear down the hall. By the time Amelia set out the afternoon tea, the rain had thickened into a steady curtain. Tobias had requested solitude after settling into his room, which wasn't uncommon. Some guests preferred privacy to rest after traveling. Still, something about his behavior felt off. Just as the grandfather clock chimed 4, Tobias re-emerged. The parlor filled with the scent of bergamot as Amelia poured steaming tea into delicate porcelain cups. A floral-patterned tray held finger sandwiches, fresh scones, and golden shortbread. Tea? Amelia offered, setting out the china with her usual care. Tobias accepted with a nod, his gaze distracted as he stirred his tea absently. His small leather journal rested on the table beside him, open but unread. I hope you found the inn to your liking so far? She asked, trying not to sound too eager. Yes, it's charming. Not exactly the enthusiastic praise she'd hoped for. Amelia watched as he broke a scone in half but didn't eat it. He glanced at the fire, then at his journal, and finally at the window. You must travel quite a bit for your writing. Yes, he said simply, then paused. I prefer places with history, towns with secrets. Something in his voice made Amelia glance at him sharply. His tone was neutral, but his eyes weren't. Well, Tumblebrook has plenty of both, she offered, smiling thinly. More than most, he murmured. Lady Grey, who had been perched on the windowsill, suddenly let out a low, guttural sound. Tobias stiffened. She doesn't seem to like me, he muttered. She's particular about people, Amelia replied, though Lady Grey's unease mirrored her own. Tobias exhaled and closed his journal. I think I'll turn in early. Tomorrow will be a long day. Of course. Let me know if you need anything.
When we hear these openings side by side, something becomes clearer. In both scenes, almost nothing happens. No mystery has unfolded yet. No problem has been announced. And yet we already understand the story has begun. The first scene welcomes us. It builds belonging. The second scene unsettles us, gently, almost imperceptibly. That is the craft of storytelling. Writers don't begin with the loud moment. They begin by giving us something to care about. A place, a routine, a person. Only after we feel at home do they allow the story to disturb that peace, because a mystery matters more when it threatens something we value. There's another part of this I want to share with you, because this is really where Bradford Press began. For most of my life, I was simply a reader. I wasn't analyzing structure. I wasn't thinking about genre. I wasn't asking why an author chose a particular opening scene. I was just doing what readers have always done. I was entering a world for a while and living there. And over time, I realized something subtle but powerful. The books I remembered weren't always the ones with the most action. They were the ones that made me feel like I had been somewhere. I could still picture the room. I could hear the conversations. I could almost remember the weather. It wasn't just a story I had consumed. It was an experience I had visited. At some point, that changed the way I looked at publishing. Publishing is often described as producing books, printing pages, distributing titles, managing releases. But I began to see it differently. A publisher is not really producing paper. A publisher is building doorways. Every book is an invitation. An author creates the world, but a publisher helps that world reach the reader who needs it. Because readers don't only look for entertainment. Sometimes they're looking for rest, sometimes reassurance, sometimes perspective, and sometimes they're just looking for a place that feels steady for a little while. That idea became the foundation of Bradford Press. I didn't want to simply release books into a marketplace. I wanted to help create places people could return to. That's why you'll hear different genres on this podcast. Cozy mysteries, where order returns and communities matter. thrillers, where courage is tested and truth has consequences. Historical fiction, where we step into lives lived before ours and understand the present a little better. They may seem very different, but they actually serve the same purpose. Each one gives the reader a meaningful experience, and that's also why the curated shelf exists alongside the books. Not as merchandise and not as decoration, but as extension. When someone sits down with a story, a cup of coffee, a familiar mug, a bookmark saved between chapters, they are creating a small ritual, a pause in the noise of everyday life, a moment of attention. Stories deserve a space like that. Publishing, at its best, is not about selling a product. It's about preserving the human habit of storytelling. For thousands of years, people gathered to hear stories, not because they lacked information, but because they needed connection. Stories help us understand people we've never met, times we've never lived, emotions we didn't know how to describe, and sometimes they help us understand ourselves. So this podcast is really an extension of that same idea. Before you decide to read a book, you get to hear it. Before you choose a story, you get to feel it. And if you never purchase a single book, that's all right, because the real goal is simpler than that. I want this to be a place you can return to, a short part of your week where the pace slows, where a voice tells a story, and for a little while you get to step into another world. That is what stories have always given us. And now through publishing, I have the privilege of helping share them. And maybe that's the simplest way to say it. Stories matter because people matter. When we take time to step into someone else's world, even a fictional one, we practice empathy. We practice patience. We practice seeing details we might otherwise overlook. And in a world that moves quickly and constantly asks for our attention, choosing to slow down and listen to a story is a quiet act of intention. That's what I hope this podcast becomes for you. Not just something you listen to in the background, but a small pause in your week, a place where you can settle in, hear a few pages, and remember what it feels like to be carried somewhere by words. Each week, we'll visit a different story, a different setting, a different kind of experience. Some will be comforting, some will be tense, some will be reflective, but all of them will be invitations. If this first episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to return next week as we step further into the world of Bradford Press stories and meet the people who live there. And if you know someone who loves stories the way you do, share this with them. Stories are meant to travel. If you enjoyed this first visit, new episodes will be released each week. I'd love for this to become part of your routine, a short time in your week where you can step away from the noise of everything else and spend a little while inside a story. You can find the books we talk about and continue the stories at the curated shelf. But whether you read them or simply listen, I'm grateful you're here. Thank you for spending this time with me. And we would be grateful if you hit the subscribe button on your player. It will really help us get the word out. Until next time, keep reading, keep wondering, and I'll meet you again between the pages.
This podcast, Between the Pages, is a production of Bradford Press. All readings are presented with permission. All character settings and stories are the property of their respective authors and Bradford Press and may not be reproduced or distributed without written consent. You can learn more about Bradford Press and explore the books featured on this show at bradfordpress.net. To continue the experience, including reading bundles and story-inspired items, visit thecuratedshelf.store. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time, Between the Pages.